Yes, any questions for anyone?
I have one for Mr. Lecky. At your paragraph 23, when you're talking about further submissions, if you have a look at that and then you have a look at para 27 of Ms. Chadwick's legal submission, and reflect on what appears to me to be a bit of difference between the two.
Yes, sure. I'm just loading up Ms. Chadwick's. I'm just scrolling down. It was 27 you mentioned, was it?
Yeah. And it was this idea of whether a further submission can sort of extend the original submission.
Oh, I see. Oh, that may be the choice of words I've used in 23, in that from the perspective of a submitter, so from the perspective of Hokanui, joining another submission by way of further submission ultimately provides scope for us to participate in that in that original submission. I'm not suggesting that the Hokanui further submission could expand the scope of that original, as in our further submissions can't extend that scope. That scope is set by the original submission. So I agree with Ms. Chadwick on that. It's just that by making a further submission, it's an additional tool that a submitter can extend their own scope, so their own ability to participate. So it's probably a semantics one. I haven't chosen my words very carefully, sorry, at 23, but I'm not suggesting a further submission can extend the scope of the original submission that further submission was lodged on.
It's good to understand. Thank you. Looking at what I've got here, it might be better suited to Ms. Murchison, and then if you identify through those conversations a legal angle, you can jump in, I think.
Yes, no, that's fine. I'll pass over to Dr. Murchison and
Look, thank you very much. We've read your written submission. I'm not sure if there's any questions that have come out of it. I don't have any questions. It's very straightforward, and we know that we'll be having more input from you on behalf of the Runanga as the process winds its way through.
I do. So I'll just check to my other panel members. Okay. So it probably does have a relationship with the scope conversations, and I apologise if you couldn't hear me and you were listening in this morning at all. I wasn't speaking well into my microphone, but we did have some conversations this morning around scope and thinking about aspects of sort of consistency and clarity and cohesion within the plan, and I've got some things to address with Mr. Heel, a bit of a list, and some of those have a relationship with the Hokanui submission. So some of what I'm going to be asking is in that vein. So one question I've got, when I look at the legal submissions in para 10, that's sort of describing the circumstances and the relationship of Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu with Hokanui Runanga. And then I look at the definition of mana whenua in the plan. So that's specifically referring to Ngāi Tahu Whānui, so the entirety, and then signalling the role of Hokonui within the district. Then when I actually go to the glossary, and which is probably going to be addressed in the next hearing, but I can't kind of avoid talking about it now, that the glossary where it says Hokonui Runanga, it's describing Hokonui as having mana whenua authority, and I really just wanted to make sure that between these terms and the definition and the glossary, that we're properly reflecting the roles and responsibilities, including as they're established under the law. And so that's, I don't know if that's an on-the-spot answer or something to think about. And as an attachment to that, this is one of those times where there's a definition that has a sort of short, clear, concise beginning, you know, referring to Ngāi Tahu Whānui, and then goes into some explanatory text. And so I had a question this morning, really more broadly around how there's a few definitions like this, where you've got something that looks like a clear element of the definition, and then some text that looks more explanatory. So wanting to know that we're using definitions that are, what was the phrase? I think just clear and enforceable, so that there's no confusion. And so when I look at those two terms at the moment, they're jostling a little bit, and that might be something you want to respond to or observe now or pick up in a bit of a reply. Over to you.
I can, do you want, Dr. Mason, do you want me to kick off perhaps, and you may have some more thoughts around that? I suspect that some parts of that, and it's a really fair question, I'm just reading the definition now in front of me. From my perspective, to the simpler part of your question, which was around the explanation text, I'd agree that it is more just an explanation that could sit somewhere else, and that as the explanation starts, in some instances, it's already not a definitive term. It's almost an example. I think it has relevance to help interpret the definition, but I'd agree that structurally it's not particularly tidy, and that it's a potentially incomplete part of the definition, because what are the other instances?
And that was my other question, was, can we be clear about, you know, the circumstances that differentiate when it is Hokonui and when it is Te Runanga? And we may or may not be able to do that. But yeah, that was one thing that it does immediately throw up.
No, that's fine. I mean, so I think in that sense that really is an explanation, and I'm not sure on the first day of the hearing, I'm not across whether this is sort of a place for explanations or whether there could be somewhere that could sit. But I can have a think about that analysis.
And without getting too complicated, are there examples or situations you're aware of where you might have a definition that itself has some italicised advice note attached to it or something, rather than going into the wider structure of the plan? Is that a way to handle it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to raise the Marlborough Plan as an example, which deals to 2 points. One being it relies on explanations a lot throughout thankfully not as complicated. And in that sense, the definition and its specificity does still work. But I exceptionally wouldn't have an issue with it being broader, and that I don't think it would be unclear who holds mana whenua. But I think to answer that question precisely, I'd be keen to get instructions from Hokonui just on whether they have a particular perspective on that we can bring to the panel.
And I think when I saw the glossary description of Hokonui Runanga, that seemed to me to be, I'm presuming that's part of the plan that did go through some thorough co-drafting. And so when I read that, it was sort of signalling what I thought was coming through clearly as the Hokonui Runanga position, and then just wanted to be sure that we were reflecting that appropriately and being consistent in our use of the terminology. So yeah, happy to leave that with you.
No, we'll make a note of that and report back.
Sorry, to just add an extra layer of complication to leave with my learned friend. Mana whenua is also defined in the RMA, so I'll leave that with you.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, a good point, and certainly be broader in the RMA. Yeah, no, we'll look that in to the response. And just I guess a process question, sorry, from me, and that's, I know you're meant to be asking me questions. Where we're going to come back to the panel, are you comfortable for us to come back when we next appear before you, or would you like written responses to these sorts of questions? We can come back perhaps in future topics if that would work for the panel, that helps.
If I can assist from a decision writing point of view, the way that mana whenua is defined is a matter that's probably better considered as part of the mana whenua chapter, and we don't need to consider a part of this, so there's no urgency, and in fact keeping it until your submissions on the mana whenua chapter is probably best. Does that meet your needs, Maria?
Good as gold, yes. And then I have only one minor question in relation to Mr. Lecky's submissions actually, which is para 61, but it might be Ms. Murchison who jumps in and answers. But when I read para 61, am I to understand that what it means is that as long as wilding exotics are controlled and managed, whether it's through the Section 42A recommended provisions or a new chapter, but just that they are controlled and managed through the plan, that's enough to satisfy Hokonui concerns.
Yes, so you captured it well, and Dr. Murchison may have the view too, but that's fundamentally the response, which is the concern are those exotic weed species and the control of them. I don't join that submission due to holding that concern. It's ultimately not a point that Ngāi Tahu or the Runanga are pursuing, but it's just a concern that they wish to have that, those exotic species managed in some way. And that was the reason for joining the Environment Southland submission. But Dr. Murchison, I'm not sure if you've got anything to add to that response.
I think you are correct, Mr. Lecky, that we did join to be part of those discussions, but absolutely agree from the point of view that we actually agree with the Section 42A report, and that these matters are already covered under the Regional Pest Strategy and the Biosecurity Act, and also when it comes to exotic plantation forestry under the NES for exotic plantation forestry 2017. So not quite supporting Southland wanting to be, but certainly wanting to be part of that discussion. And so consequently happy with the Section 42A mana whenua means for the local mana whenua or their mandated representative. And in my view, that would be the appropriate way to do this. And I'd like to apologise to the panel. This is my bad. I missed that when I was going through in the submissions. That was sitting in there, and that is quite incorrect in my view.
Okay, thank you. That your answer just then, which included reference to the Ngāi Claims Settlement Act, when I look at the introductory section and where it points to that act, it only references statutory acknowledgements. And so one of my questions was, which is definitely for this hearing, is, you know, is that enough? Is that an accurate reflection of what's sitting in the NTCSA that is relevant for the subject matter of the plan?
We are in this slightly embarrassing position of having provided some planning expertise to Gore District Council during the drafting of this, and Gore District Council had, in good faith, accepted at face value what was provided to them by that expertise. Now, obviously, as you're rightly pointing out, there are some issues with some of the information that has been provided that needs to be corrected, and consequently the very comprehensive submission that has come in on the entire plan, in particular in relation to Ngāi Tahu values and the references to culturally significant sites. We were anticipating that this would probably, that might have been the first or second candle for the rig in terms of hearing sequence, given it's a treaty partner, but we're not, we're in hearing stream 3. So we're now in the slightly awkward position that we are having to respond to you in hearing streams 1 and 2 around secondary matters when we haven't yet been able to give you the core and fundamental of our case, which won't happen until hearing stream 3. So yes, I agree, it's another issue, and we'll be in your hands as to where and how you want us to respond, and whether you want us to hold those things over to hearing stream 3 or not.
Well, this was one of my thoughts. There is definitely certain elements of this chapter that we're concerned with, where I'm seeing things that might fall into this, like I said at the start, this cohesion within the plan and consistency, and also being consistent with our legal requirements, you know, all of that, and that I could see some matters in that vein that might need to be addressed in this chapter. So another example is there's some discrepancy just within this introductory material, where the Mataura Water Conservation Order is missing from one part of it but pops up in another, and the freshwater mātaitai, which is more relevant for Ngāi Tahu, it's not, but you know, it might be that you want to comment on the Water Conservation Order as well, but the freshwater mātaitai, this is something that fell out of treaty settlement and is referenced in part of this overview section and not another part where it could and should be. So, like, there's a wee list of those, but we might be able to rattle through them quite quickly. They might be highlights, and depending on how the chair and the other panel members want to do this, whether we, you know, actually deliberately address them now and not leave too much hanging for the mana whenua chapter. Just where we can address them now, address them.
Let's start off that way anyway.
Yeah, jolly
Or
good.
Ed.
Yeah, I'm a little mindful of the time at present, whether it is necessary to do it at this stage.
Or whether we could circle back after the next couple of submitters.
If it's helpful, can I suspect some of that material is introductory material material that doesn't require a submission in order to be corrected because it's just corrections of fact.
Mm,
And
yes.
it might be that, is it helpful if we take that away with your highlights and concerns and bring back a text changed version
I actually
rather
think
than going through it now? Would
that
that be helpful?
that would be very helpful. Yep.
Mr. Leakey's not jumping in and growling at me, so I'm assuming I am correct in that it is largely factual material and not material that requires a submission to change.
Yeah, no, that, I'm quite comfortable with that. What I was sort of pausing for was that I think it would be helpful to run through it or to get some feedback, perhaps, if we've got time today. But I do support coming back with the track change version, and it will also then be able to align with the evidence that will be accompanying the mana whenua to the chapter 3 or topic 3 hearing. And to have the evidence alongside the relief, I think would be the most helpful way to progress this. So no, I agree with Dr. Murchison. But any signal from the commissioners just on those points would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, and so then going to Commissioner Hovell's point that that you know we're running a bit behind time and we've got a couple of other submitters waiting. You know, is there an opportunity to pause our conversation and come back, or do we need to just rattle through as fast as we can now?
I've got a proposal to the extent it's confined to that particular issue, is the panel could potentially issue direction for the further information to be provided by Hokonui Runanga, for that information to be published online, and then following receipt, perhaps the hearing panel could make a further direction as when it would be engaged with, whether it was at the commencement as a special conversation for the next hearing or topic 3. The Runanga may have submissions about that as well, but certainly in terms of if it's a discrete issue that can be directed in a minute, that might give a little bit of relief in terms of time, and also give you the certainty that information was coming.
That sounds like a great way forward. In which case, when I go through, because much of it was of that ilk, then I'm only left with looking at UFD 013, which broadly references Māori rather than mana whenua or Ngāi Tahu specifically. Does that look right, particularly when you then look at UFD 08? Are you intending to mean Māori broadly, or is it, let's put it another way, is there any concern attached with referring to Māori broadly there rather than mana whenua or Ngāi Tahu? And should that objective at 3 be looking different to UFD 08 language, for instance?
Can I just clarify something on that?
Yeah.
The version I've got, UFD 013,
Yeah.
it talks about recognising and providing for the relationship of mana whenua with whenua wai and mahinga kai.
Oh, that's been updated.
That's a section 42A recommendation.
Oh, sorry, it got up. Yeah.
No, it's in the Appendix A.
Oh, very
on
good.
Page
Thank you.
35.
My apologies. Already addressed. And then it probably just, the last thing then is the special purpose zone and the application of the national planning standards to the rationale for the Māori purpose zone, but that may well be addressed in that later hearing. But if UFD 055, which currently puts the Māori purpose zone at the bottom of the hierarchy, is that a concern, and what is the impact if that hierarchy remains and the Māori purpose zone is at the bottom of the hierarchy? Is there any impact on prioritisation and resourcing? Those were the two things I could think of. And that really is my last question then.
zones has its own hearing, so we can check back on that point. Are you comfortable with that? Yeah.
That's me.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
So the outcome of that is that we will issue a direction for clarification of the issues that Maria wants to add, and other members of the panel may add to that as well. So we'll do that as soon as practicable.
And that's
Thank you very much. Thank you for your solution. Thank you for your questions. And we'll see you next time round.
thank you very much. We'll sign off.
You're welcome. Next submitters, Groundswell. You've been waiting a wee while. Oh, I'll get Lawrence Group.
Just before you start, for the benefit of the panel and those in attendance, this is submission 66001 and 002, which are at paragraphs 146 and 191 of the planner's report. Thank you.
Right, we're ready for you to proceed.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. Hi, I'm Laurie Patterson, anyway, co-founder of Groundswell NZ. Thank you for allowing us to come here and speak in person. Probably find it quite exciting, actually, after talking to a screen all day, as you possibly have been doing. Yeah, get ready to be excited, I suppose. Excuse me. I must apologise for the absence of Bryce McKenzie and our environmental spokesman, Jamie McFadden. As we're all volunteers, we all have other jobs that sometimes take precedence. And Jamie would have been here on screen, but he's planting a few thousand native trees at the top of some river in Canterbury. However, I'm ably supported by Russell Faulkner over there and Diane Smiley from our Gore board, and they're also ratepayers like me of the Gore District Council. We have numerous boards up and down the country, in fact about 70 different ones, and we've got 100,000 plus members, so we're not all about farmers, but we cross over big time into rural towns and cities. Get a lot of support, even from Auckland, would you believe it? Because of this, we're kind of engaged in this sort of activity up and down the country, and we've been operational on the West Coast, also with the Waitaki District Council and Hiranui District Council and ECAN, and also Environment Southern. So you will have read our submission, so there's no need to reread all that, although I guess you guys have been reading so much stuff lately. I don't envy you the task, to be honest. I guess the thing is, Section 6 of the RMA is of particular concern to us, and its designations of significant natural areas, outstanding national landscapes, outstanding natural features and other landscape zonings, wetlands, riparian margins, and sites and areas significant to Maori, or SASM, cultural sites and cultural landscapes. Now, there has been a bit of movement on that by the government recently, in that they're saying pushing things like SNAs away for 3 years, and also Indigenous biodiversity. But I must say, as a ratepayer, I was absolutely appalled to see the whole Gore District Council designated SASM. Now, I don't have a problem with designated sites being significant to Maori, but the whole district and I cannot see how the councillors we elect could let this go through. I think it's just ridiculous. Yes, we can all come in and submit against it, which is what we're doing here, but any sites should have been identified in the first instance, or no SASM should have been included in the plan. There needs to be a bit of incentive for people to do stuff. So we ask the council to pause all Section 6 activity until such times the government has come out with the new RMA, so everyone actually knows what the playing field looks like. Normally the answer to that is, well, the law says we must proceed, rah, rah, rah. So question really is, what are the ramifications of that? Well, about 5 or 6 years ago, the Huranui District Council threw out all the SNAs that they had, and they had a lot. And what were the ramifications of that? Well, absolutely nothing in actual fact. Nothing happened. Maybe that was the case of councillors telling the CEO what they want to happen and it not happening the other way around. We also have the case of the Grey District submitting against the TTPP on the West Coast, of which they are part of. So there's a lot of confusion out there and things like this. And maybe it's just the fact I'm getting old, but back when I was young, the Russians and the Chinese used to do 5-year plans, and the net result of all that normally was half the people died of starvation. And now we're actually all trying to do 10-year plans. Nothing wrong with having some goals out there, but when it's an industry planning out 10 years, really, when you know that things won't be anything like that in 10 years' time. So that's a bit of a worry. But I think the whole thing regarding the whole district being classified as SASM is just another assault on property rights. And when we look around this beautiful district and see the amenities that we have today and the ability that the council wants us to pay rates of 21.4% being asked for, this will be funded by the people in the past and probably in the present who own property and roll up their sleeves and get on with it, and not seeing their properties devalue with arbitrary designations being put on them, because that is a real risk. Now, I guess you guys will have done Section 32 financial analysis on this. Do we get an opportunity to see that?
As part of the documentation that was documentation of the notified plan, there was a Section 32 report that's available on the council's website.
Okay, righto, thanks for that. So what we think is there should be no SNAs, SASMs or heritage buildings, etc. without the consent of the property owner. They own the property and they should have a say in what happens. It shouldn't be just arbitrarily brought in from the outside. I guess another question is, if this goes through, what's going to happen with the wall of consenting that will be required? Further cost on stretched landowners and a lot more pressure on councils, who already seem to be under quite a bit of pressure. So I guess any specific sites must be identified, and if they're going to be taken out of property owners' use, if you like, then they should be compensated for. Pretty sensible. And then there's also the question of whether blanket SAMs are in fact legal, and we're taking some advice on that. You want to add to that, Russell?
Sorry. Yeah, I was absolutely appalled that a district that relies entirely, virtually entirely on its farming sector would actually, as Laurie said, that the councillors listen to the staff who also live in the same district, that the whole district would be an SNA, and that the arrogance, if you like, that if people don't like it, they'll object to it. So I'll bring it in and see what happens. You get a retort to it, you get a reply to it. Section 6 of the RMA needs to be thrown out, and that is basically in this, your own document. You're being told on page 14 by whoever wrote this, what's the name? Matthew somebody? Is that you? I did presume that. That government legislation will be changing it anyway. Well written bit at the end there, talking about suspend for 3 years requirements under the National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity for councils to identify new SNAs, include them in district plans. The government are given that there, that needs to be wiped by this council, taken back to square one. In other words, get rid of the SNA on this whole district. If there is going to be anything, perhaps instead of just all of a sudden using a map, and I don't know whether, did these guys get the West Coast one?
No,
Where
they
those
didn't, no.
SNA maps have been a farce. In other words, some parts of the West Coast are actually in the middle of the sea that they had identified, which was shocking. Yep, that basically what I've got to say on that. Section 6 needs to be thrown out the RMA, which is a government job, and that you need to listen to what the Minister of the Environment is saying about delaying any application of SNAs and SASMs right now. That's me.
Diane?
Well, I'm really just supporting both what Laurie and Russell said, but as a ratepayer and somebody who bought their land, in all honesty, that they were going to be allowed to farm it, and then with absolutely no consultation with us at all, we are being informed that one, our land could halve in price, that we are totally threatened as to what we can do. Suddenly we don't own our land anymore. We have to pay consents to do anything with our land, and to my knowledge none of us have been consulted before this was put on paper as a projection of what could happen. So I guess I'm just here asking the councillors to please rethink this and consider the consultation process that took place, and also where the knowledge came from that suddenly all of our land could belong to somebody else, or someone else have control of it. That's hugely concerning for my children and my grandchildren. I guess I'm here as a spokesman for the future as well. Thank you.
I think that's a very valid point though, because there's a huge amount of mental pressure out there, and certainly, you know, with what Groundswell's done, it absolutely amazed us. I mean, we were just doing what we were doing, but the number of people that, you know, are under severe mental stress it's bloody amazing, to be honest, and not a good thing. And the fact that you do get your property designated as something else without really actually even knowing about it is very concerning, and the property values do drop, there's no question about that. I'm not quite sure, perhaps you can enlighten me, because while the government, and we've been talking to the government too, but while they've been saying effectively that, okay, for 3 years we'll drop SNAs and we'll drop SNIB, I don't see any reference in there anywhere to SASM. So is that sacrosanct somehow, or is no one prepared to stand up for, you know, the poor guys at the bottom and girls at the bottom that in actual fact are under this extreme pressure? Like, yeah.
I think I can help in that. Government has a number of policy statements, and they've only put a hold on the things that are subject to policy statements, and the areas of significance, the SEMs, are not in the government policy statement, so aren't subject yet to any indication of where that's heading.
In some respect, we are dictated by legislation and government direction, and we have to give effect to national policy statements in whatever form they come. It's our legal requirement. But I guess I would say we do appreciate the relevance or the importance or the vitality or the essential spirit of agriculture in the Gore district, and grappling with how we can incorporate that in the plan, because at the moment, without agriculture, the Gore district or what we enjoy in the Gore district would not be here in the first place or endure. So that's a little bit of a challenge. I would say, you know, as a southern person and a person involved in farming, perhaps our appreciation is a little bit different from people further north who don't understand the importance of our culture. And my own personal view is you know, we give effect to cultural values and Indigenous cultural values, but there's agricultural cultural values as well, and they're, you know, no less important, I think. So I don't think I can give you an answer that to your question, but I can say I understand your question, and not on a different page.
I'm impressed with the fact, Cliff, that you started off by saying to some extent we have to do what the government wants. You know, we just have to push back on some of this stuff. Otherwise, well, because we all know it's half mad, and we know that people have made huge efforts in the Gore area, not only farmers but other people as well, you know, cleaning up waterways, doing all the stuff, but there's absolutely no credit for it. And that really gets people down. And what you say is also right. While the Gore district might be significant to Maori, it's also significant to all the rest of us as well. And I guess that's why we are concerned that the council at the time, when they saw that was coming through the plan, didn't say, hang on a minute, guys, you have to identify what you're talking about here. So, disappointing, and we're, you know, well, I've told the mayor that as well, so.
Yeah, well, I think you've laid out your position really well, really clearly. When you're thinking about the impact of some of these things, from conversations in other places, there can be a perception that what's coming in might affect existing use rights. So there was a conversation earlier today with Federated Farmers as well. I don't know if you were here for that or listening in. Oftentimes what's coming in to this plan process won't impact on existing use rights. It might be more of a matter for thinking about future development, and my reason for highlighting that is that it's a common perception that it's going to you know, have an impact on existing use and existing use rights that in fact the plan can't do. So that's one thing that I know causes people anxiety and concern. So, and it's a reason I think that Fed Farmers were wanting to have that conversation about what is existing use, what is lawfully established, so that that's partly addressing that aspect of concern. And then the other concern obviously is, what does it mean if something lands what are the provisions doing and what does that require, and to what extent, when you're having these conversations up and down the country, around the place and in different plan hearings, have you seen things addressed better in terms of the impact of provisions? You know, like, have you got some examples of done well versus done worse that you want to share, or something like that?
Russell's got an example there that I'm sure you could have of the West Coast, where things haven't been done well at all, and people suddenly get a letter in the mail telling them that they've got, you know, all these things put on their property, and we've got people there that, in some cases, that have got 3 or 4 or 5 of these things on their property, and, you know, pretty scary. And we had an example of one couple on the West Coast that bought a rundown area which they were going to use for their retirement fund, and then the council designated it a wetland, so they couldn't develop it and they couldn't sell it to anybody, and that was their whole retirement fund gone, bang, just like that.
So there were two things I heard from you then. One of them was kind of that consultation aspect, like a conversation didn't happen and then something lands, so there's that bit. And then there's the impact bit of the provisions. So, and we've heard like some examples of done badly, and I think when you know, when you were talking around Huranui, I think you were pointing to Huranui as an example that you could look at positively. So I'm just, I guess, asking in terms of not just the consultation process, but that's one bit of it, obviously, but the provisions and how they apply, and what's done, you know, what pops out the other end. And my reason for asking that is sometimes, and I do have a little bit of experience sitting on the West Coast panel as well. For instance, there are some of these sites and areas of significance for Māori over there don't have any rules associated with them, so they don't have an effect other than, in some instances, some design elements. And then there's the example that you've just given in terms of a wetland having a really extreme impact. And so it was just to test if there are, does that factor into your responses and your thinking when you're looking at a particular place or a particular plan, as to how things apply, not just that it's there. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a thing that's there, but it might be what effect does that have in practice. That's probably what I'm getting at.
So the principle of unintended consequences, which is poor planning. Some of these consequences should have been thought about. You've got SNAs that are going to be on properties that the cocky has to fence, farmer has to fence, that he pays rates on, cannot use, cannot do anything with it. Well, goodness gracious me. I've always believed that if people want somebody else to do something because they theoretically believe in whatever it is, they can pay for it. But whenever you use legislation to as a form of property theft. Yeah, so your comment, I'm not sure if I'm disagreeing with you or not.
Yeah, you know,
But,
I'm following you. You just say what you want to say. Yeah.
So the SNA's legislation is at odds with the district plan. When you said something before, wish I'd written that down. You were saying that it cannot be compulsorily
Existing use rights.
Yes, existing use, that was where the path went to.
Yeah, and lawfully established activities.
So the SNA legislation would be at odds.
We'll have
your
to,
district plan.
we really should get back to your submission
Yes, I know.
to the district. I'm sorry, we do appreciate your comments, we do understand them, and probably agree. Please don't quote me.
I
You,
guess
you will be coming back where the SNAs and issues like that are dealt with in more detail. And I look forward to the perspective that you guys are giving.
yeah. So you will be coming back to the later hearings. Are we? Yeah. But my reason for asking that last question was that we do have a job, like, i.e. we will have to apply the law, we will have to look at what the provisions do in each of these chapters. So when you come back, that is what we're doing. So it was mostly just testing if that's the lens you'll bring in terms of when we're looking at each, you know, what's the most desirable outcome where we have to apply provisions. I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at.
But then the guts of our submission is the application of a total district-wide SNA, which was
SASM, you mean?
Yes, and
SASM, yes.
Yeah, and that'll be for the hearing 3. Yep.
And I think the worry of it is that, or one of the worries of it is that, and you know, what you said really was that, okay, it's, you know, people don't know and it's not going to affect what's happening now. So that's a real education thing, because no one gets that at all. They just think about the here and now, because that's what farmers do. But the other thing is, once you get something like this in, it's pretty easy to alter it at the stroke of a pen. Much better if it's not in at all. You know, and people say, oh yeah, but hang on, it'll only be low-level consenting, you know, it won't be rah, 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 and all the rest of it. But that'll change, for sure. That, you know, the council will change, the staff will change, and then one day they'll decide, oh, hang on, we'll rev that up a bit, need a bit more money perhaps.
Well, the SNAs certainly won't be in there because direction from central government is that they're not included.
Yeah.
We will have to identify other areas of, you know, indigenous biodiversity and things like that. And we're totally in the hands of central government. I am heartened. I think. Actually, it was the Prime Minister who said, our farmers are not criminals. Said that very quietly about 18 months ago. So that gave me some encouragement. We'll see how it plays out.
Just one further comment, Cliff, it's been a long time since I've sat across the table from you. Groundswell of consistently, in the submission, consistently received from across the country, including law, relates to private land being used, you know, taken off. Now the problem we got out there is that that is a consistent message coming through to us, but most farmers don't actually understand what is actually happening here. So they're either very aware and against it, or they're totally unaware of the possible consequences of having SNAs and SASMs.
Could I perhaps maybe help by a question? I'm assuming you talk about private property rights and how we treat them or how we describe them in the plan. I'm assuming that you would not wish to see any diminution of the status of rural and primary activity and its contribution to the Gore District as we describe it in the plan or accommodate it in the plan. You want to see the status of agriculture in the Gore District continue in its preeminent place, or acknowledged in that way.
Yeah, I think there's no question that we know that the town depends on our rural activities, and just as the rural activities are important to the town's important to the rural activities too. We're all in this together, which is something that when you get to places like Auckland, they don't get that. They will when the downturn gets to them in a few years' time. But one of the other things, though, that we need to we need to try and avoid is farmers and councils sort of being against each other. We need to be able to get buy-in to, you know, what's happening when you think about significant areas and all the rest of it. And the difference for farmers between something like an SNA and the QE2 trusters, the QE2 trusters, they've decided to put it into that and they take pride in it, so they look after it. You come along and say, right, but there's an SNA, the first thing that happens is they say, well, bugger that, am I allowed to say that? You know, well, I'm not looking after it, and then the things are growing gorse and broom. And so you have to be able to get, you know, the people that are going to, that it affects, to be part of it, which is exactly the same thing as the heritage building thing, isn't it, really? If you go and put a tap on someone's building, they're just annoyed. But you need to, if you can get them to buy in to be part of it, that's good. And the same thing has to happen here. And that's the only way that I think can stop you guys getting, getting it in the neck all the time, really. We have to be able to achieve that.
And you speak about QE2 covenants. Well, you do get subsidised fencing as well with that. So, you know, that's, a lot of farmers have taken that option in the district, which is good. Yes, it is.
Yeah, I don't know that that's the main, we've got one at home, I don't know that that's the main reason for doing it though, but you're dead right, that does come into it, and that's a nice feeling thing as much as anything else, I think. And you know, there's thousands of acres out there on farms that are, you know, growing, you know, native scrubland, trees and all the rest of it out there. And, you know, you just got to give the people a feeling of being part of it.
Right, any more questions that pertain to the submission? I've got to carry on. Thank you very much for your submission, and we'll look forward to meeting you again as more topics crop up and affect agriculture. Thank you very much. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, and it's good, isn't it? Just be like the old days where you just talk to people. Amazing.
Yeah. Environment Southland, far away.
Kia ora. Thanks for the opportunity. I won't take too long because I'm probably much like the rest of you and can feel your navel rubbing your backbone because there's not much left in your stomach. So, so my name is Marcus Roy. I'm the Manager of Policy and Government Reform at Environment Southland. I've got 15 years planning experience, a full member of the Planning Institute, and also hold the Making Good Decisions qualification. So Environment Southland is the Southland Regional Council. I'm sure you're all aware of that. And effectively, reason for being here today is to, I guess, to give the high-level overview of the scene setting around flood management and wild conifer control. So the submission from Environment Southland doesn't specifically outline the requirements of needing to be in accordance with the Southland Regional Policy Statement. It's implied, and I'm sure you're all aware of that process, so I'm not going to labour that through too much. And it's been included in the Section 42 planning report as well. First submission point was around the exotic tree chapter. So Environment Southland considers that there is a significant risk of wilding exotic trees causing adverse social, cultural, economic and environmental effects across the region. Queenstown Lakes District Council have got quite a good chapter which we've highlighted there in the submission point. I guess there are a few differences in the nature of the Gore District and QLDC, but we see that wilding trees prevention is better than cure in that sense that if you prevent them going into the ground, then you prevent a whole lot of trying to fix the problem once it's escalated. And you can spend millions of dollars on the tail end of that process, which is occurring in other parts of Southland. And while the proposed landscape chapter of the district plan will go some way to managing wilding trees establishment. Environment Southern is of the view that the chapter would go further, a new chapter would go further to preserving wider rural character and preventing them establishing in the wider district. The reporting officers rejected the submission point, and Environment Southern doesn't necessarily agree with that, with all due respect. Second key issue, which I'll talk a bit more in detail on, is around the submission point S585.069. So around the urban form and development. So when I've referred to stormwater capacity during flooding, I guess I've taken the view that it's not necessarily stormwater as defined by a three waters perspective in a reticulated sense. It's more stormwater as in flooding any water outside of a primary conveyance channel. So whether that's a pipe, an open ditch, a floodplain within confined banks, any sort of secondary overflow from a designated design channel. So that's, I guess, what I was intending when I was thinking about the secondary flow paths. So Environment Southern supports urban growth and is particularly interested in natural hazard management and preventing development in inappropriate locations. So the natural hazard management spans, I guess, emergency management functions, Local Government Act functions and RMA functions. So reduction, readiness, response and recovery are the four key aspects with the Emergency Management Act. So you're trying to prevent issues before they become a problem is more beneficial than trying to resolve issues after they've occurred. Looking nationally and internationally, financial trends from New Zealanders are to hold a lot of asset value in property. They use that as their primary nest egg for retirement. And as we're seeing across Southland already, there is riverine inundation situations where insurance is pulling out. Particularly, there's a couple of instances in Invercargill City that one of the main insurance companies are withdrawing cover for flood risk, and that flood risk is on a tiny corner of a section, not actually meeting any private house or residential area, despite the house being up on a terrace above the flood level. There's about a 5 square metre patch of land below the terrace that is floodable, but the whole property is being tagged as floodable, and that property owner is unable to get insurance from one of the main insurance companies. So I guess what we're trying to identify is that there is a shift already occurring, and that shift is, I guess, already been seen in Australia, and New Zealand normally follows Australia. So some of those large Victorian floods over in Aussie, there is a massive change in how the industry has taken a risk-based approach to insuring properties as opposed to an everybody pays for everybody approach. So there's very much a targeted approach coming. With lack of insurance means lack of bank loans, and there's also Section 73 notices under the Building Act. When someone has a piece of land, they try to build on it. If it's identified in a flood zone, a notice can be put on the property as part of that process to restrict or absolve council from liability should the land be flooded. So I guess there's a lot of indications out there across Southland, but also across the wider New Zealand with Cyclone Gabrielle. There are a lot of changes happening in that natural hazard space, and prevention is certainly better than cure. Made it quite clear that Environment Southland is in the process of modelling the floodplain through Gore and Mataura. That work was commissioned January last year and is still not yet been finalised, but it is in the early stages of being through that process, and we are going to be bringing that to the hearings panel at some point, probably as the zone chapters start rolling out through the hearing process. 2020 floods met the design parameters of the stock banks through Gore, so I think there's about 2,300 cumex, 2,300 cumex flowing through Gore, bang on the design parameters. So that scheme was designed for a 1 in 100 year flood. but it's likely that as climate change continues, that the scale of protection that those banks afford will reduce over time, and there's potential that despite the stock banks providing a level of comfort, they are not going to be able to provide for all flood scenarios for all of time without significant investment. So I guess what we want to highlight is that despite there being a primary flood defence mechanism with stock banks, there is still a residual flood risk for land development and investment, whether that's private investment or council infrastructure behind those stock banks. And it's prudent to be cognizant of those issues through the district plan process and make sure that there is a risk reduction or risk awareness as development is considered. So with the Urban Form and Development chapter, it was couched as a strategic section of the district plan to help guide development. So I guess when we were reviewing that chapter, although there is a section there in an objective UFD 01 subsection 5 around take into account natural hazard. I was of the position when putting the submission that the objective was not as strong as it could be. It was, have regard to, whereas some of the other verbs, as Commissioner Hovell sort of put it there a couple of submitters ago, some of the other verbs are a bit more, they're more strongly worded, whereas the have regard to natural hazards is a little bit weak, and it should be a bit more front and centre, and understand that the interplay between this chapter and the natural hazards chapter will still follow through, but I think the signal that you're sending with the Urban Form and Development chapter does need to have a specific section in there on managing natural hazards moving forward. And I guess land development, as soon as you develop land or subdivide it, it's there for intergenerations time moving forward. So it's not a flash in the pan. It will outlive this district plan and future district plans. So having that really, really long-term view and not perpetuating risk and tying future landowners or future council into reconciling issues when they arise with flooding is a good approach. A couple of the indicators we've seen with Cyclone Gabrielle and Hawke's Bay, the buyout of red stickered houses has been a 50-50 buyout between central government and local government. So I guess there's an indication there that government isn't going to waltz in and save the day. There is still potentially a liability risk for Gore District Council and Environment Southland in situations where there is natural hazard retreat or natural hazard rezoning due to significant natural hazard risk. So I guess in terms of the last couple of points, ongoing investment into stock bank protection is financially unsustainable. Continuing to increase stock banks year on year and generation on generation is not a prudent way to look at managing risk. There needs to be some aspects around how do we try and transition into more sustainable long-term viable locations. So in addition to the river run inundations, the submission point also captures infrastructure capacity and how that can contribute to flooding. So there have been instances where localised downpours and gores have caused surface flooding, and secondary flow paths are essential to manage that secondary flooding. When the stormwater system becomes overwhelmed, some better consideration of how those secondary flow paths can move and how do we plan and make sure that minimum floor levels potentially are one solution to mitigating the impacts of secondary flow paths and drainage systems becoming overwhelmed, whether that's stormwater drainage or bank overtopping or bank breach or anything like that. And open drainage systems are part of the flood scheme as well. So I guess the review of the district plan is an opportunity to look strategically at long-term location of urban centres and investment, and particularly making sure that there's a duty of care exercised from council around making sure that residents, businesses, industry and the community have that suitability and long-term view around how the future of the town is going to function beyond the term of this district plan, because the signals we're seeing now will have an ongoing implications for future generations beyond the life of the plan. So yeah, I guess just making sure that there is, final point is effectively making sure that there is consistency with the regional policy statement in terms of how it manages significant effects from natural hazards, and we're preempting that and not perpetuating issues unnecessarily. So happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm encouraged by some of your comments, particularly in terms of recognising that continuing to increase the height of stop banks is not sustainable, and it's an issue that I guess this particular council is focusing on with the regional council. And while we're on that, the secondary flows, and I'll come back to the wilding trees, only got to look at what happened in Auckland last year on the television of cars floating in water, where the secondary flow line was through a residential subdivision, and I certainly see that there is some merit in what you're arguing. The submission you've lodged referred to secondary flows, but you actually described it in more general terms, saying that this chapter that we're looking at needed to make reference to natural hazards generally, and it's probably within the scope of what's in the submission to include something of that type. The alternative is for provisions to be put in the natural hazards section or to be put in the subdivision section. Why do you think it should be in the urban form chapter, I guess, is the lead?
Yeah, I guess when I was reading through the construct of how the plan was put together, it was very much the sense that that chapter was a overarching strategy for growth and development. It didn't just cover urban growth, it covered other aspects of the rural residential and other aspects of industrial land. So it's an overarching expectation to the community around how development should occur, and I felt as part of the ES process was that natural hazards should be reasonably front and central in that frame. There were other Section 6 matters covered in that chapter, such as highly productive land. That was one off the top of the head, so thinking that, if you're including one, then there should be some inclusion of other aspects. But natural hazards is one of those ones that is changing. Information is becoming more readily available, and there's a onus on council and individual landowners to be a bit more smart about how that works moving forward.
Yeah, I guess I'll just flag, and before there's any other questions on this one, and turning to the other, that I've made a note here that I'll be requesting Matt in his right of reply to actually respond to the way that you've expressed it today in general terms and what you've described. So he'll be doing that in writing, and you'll have the opportunity of seeing that, rather than he's preferring not to give an oral response, wants to think it through in a bit more detail. So I just wonder if other commissioners have got any questions in relation to the overland flows, and then we'll turn to the other one. Yeah.
Thank you for your submission. Just wondering, can you clarify what you mean by open drainage systems? Is that for stormwater, or is that for overflow from rivers or from land?
Yes, effectively, open drainage systems is in some townships, enclosed pipes only go so far, and then the pipes become open ditches or creeks or swales. So I guess it's trying to encompass all of those aspects of the drainage system as a whole, between up catchment through an urbanised environment and then into a lower catchment. There are different scales of drainage. So being open ditch, if it was above Gore Township, through pipes and swales through town, and then once you get beyond town, occasionally it gets into open drains again. They are all part of the drainage network, and so it should all be covered by those secondary flow paths and management around the risk of water being where it is normally not designed to be.
Does that include like wetlands as well, trying to slow the water down further
Certainly,
up the catchment?
yep, certainly encourage wetlands wherever possible. They help slow and filter water and improve water quality the whole way down the catchment. So I guess, yeah, there is aspects where, you know, wetlands do flood, and that's part of the function of the wetlands, and that should be encouraged as part of that process. But I guess what we're trying to manage is the interface between built form and urban growth to areas that are prone to getting wet, whether that's through pipes, swales, stop banks, or overland flow paths.
Like Commissioner Hovell, I'm very pleased to see that you're just not going to keep building flood banks taller and taller. I think there's other ways of flowing down the water.
Maria, did you have any questions on overland?
Only one question, and that was, when we are addressing natural hazards as a topic later in the hearing, are you going to be back? Or is, yeah.
Certainly.
Yep.
Certainly.
So
I won't miss the opportunity.
Yeah. So this is to ensure that the UFD is picking up the matter.
Yeah.
I think you were really clear on that in terms of your rationale around consistency of reference to Section 6 matters. So got nothing further from me.
Sorry to jump in, but just to assist us with our response, it might be helpful if we could understand any potential wording changes that are proposed by Mr. Roy to address the matters. I'm not allowed to address you directly.
So I guess I haven't really come too prepared in that sense. I thought just, I guess, putting it on the table as something to flag for the committee, but I guess wanting to address it probably in more detail as zone chapter changes come through. But I guess what we're seeing elsewhere in the country is generally there's a 300 mils to 500 mils floor level above secondary flow path heights is general position that some locations are going with. So recognising that 1 in 100 year events are reasonably common, and they are going to continue getting worse. So when you're investing millions of dollars into a structure or a building, then you want it to be there for the long haul and maintain insurance over that long-term time frame.
So apologies, I didn't understand that to be a change to UFD 01 then necessarily?
So I guess we were, through you, panel chair, we were looking to, I guess the relief we were seeking through the submission point was having a specific objective relating to identification of natural hazards and a strong verb around how the scale of scrutiny required at that stage around natural hazards, rather than a shall consider. It should be must consider natural hazard risk associated with new development, something along those lines.
Repeat. Must consider natural hazard risk.
It's an objective must consider. It doesn't really lead you to an outcome. I guess if you're wanting a strong verb, then it is to avoid the effects of overland flows on development or whatever.
No, I guess there is certainly instances where there's a functional need to put infrastructure and structures in those areas, but I guess it's how can we manage sensitive activities and mitigate and minimise the risk. So avoid is possibly a step too far, but yeah, certainly wanting to advocate pretty strongly that there is a reason to not put things in harm's way, but there are certainly instances where you need to put infrastructural structures in, such as weirs, dams, retaining wetlands, all sorts of different things which are structures or infrastructure to help manage flow paths or stop banks and things.
Is the objective to minimise natural hazard risk? Is it as simple as that?
Well, I guess it's minimising the impact on built form. I guess.
Only built form?
What I'm wondering is for our legal advisor, can we ask Marcus to go away and sorry, Mark, not quite that way, and actually come back to us over the next couple of days with some wording that he would like to see as an objective?
Well, perhaps just as a direction that you make to Mr. Roy today, for him to provide it, and then we would have the opportunity to respond in the reply.
Yes. So if you're happy to do that sometime this week.
Yep, no problems.
Thank you. So
Can I just, sorry, I just want to clarify something that Commissioner Bartley was bringing up. Is it just for urban development and buildings, or does that include things like forestry as a natural hazard as well, like we saw in Cyclone Gabrielle?
Yeah, I guess we were looking to try and address that through the natural hazard chapter in the zone sections. This one was primarily around the development, and when we saw development, it was primarily around urbanisation or growth or structures. So yeah, certainly we would advocate against putting plantation forestry in floodplains. And the Environment Southland has got a whole chunk of work around slowing the flow and trying to prevent floods occurring, taking a Te Uka Tiki Tai approach of whole of catchment, mountains to sea approach of restricting the water up catchment where we can and slowing it down the whole way down catchment, rather than going, let's just keep building stop banks to help keeping it away from the things we think are important. So we're trying to go for that sort of approach.
turning to wilding trees, I'm not too sure when the QLDC chapter was drafted, but in 2017, I think with the National Environmental Standard for Production Forestry came along. Mm-hmm. And what is in the report in response to your submission is that the pest management strategy has the opportunity of dealing with wilding pines, and it does list some species. But the NES for production forestry has a regime in it that if you're doing production forestry, you need to go through an exercise of actually assessing whether the species in the area that you are planting actually gives rise to that planting being categorised as wilding pines. So given that that's now in force, what benefit is there to be gained by having a chapter in the plan that actually puts us a step ahead of what's in the National Environmental Standard?
Certainly, and the November changes to the NES PF when it became a NES CF for commercial forestry enabled councils to be more restrictive around any aspects of afforestation. So there is scope in the NES for councils being more strict around afforestation across wildings or location, or it's not solely confined to landscapes and SNAs. But yeah, I guess take your point. There are other tools in the toolbox to help manage wilding pines, and certainly one of the approaches Environment Southland is looking at is reviewing the regional pest management strategy. That could be some years off, and we're seeking that the opportunity is explored to not only protect Gore District but also protect spillover into adjoining districts such as CODC or Clutha. Some of those areas are prone to wildings, so forestry established in Gore may well not be deemed wilding, but into more rugged country in adjoining regions could actually pose problems.
I'm hoping, because I haven't checked, that this issue comes up in the rural section again, and I guess I'd flag that we would want to receive a Section 32 analysis that underpins any request for a rule like that to go in.
From the submitter?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm putting the ball back into your court, saying you've raised a notion that is of concern to many people, but if you want us to advance it in the plan, then you need to do the work in terms of the Section 32 rather than relying on us or council's consultants to do it.
Yep, understand. I anticipate we'll probably be in the same constraints that Gore District Council's in, with capacity and priorities and volume of change occurring in the system.
Made reference to November. Was that November past or November coming up? Changes to the...
Oh, that was November 2023. The NES plantation forestry changed to NES commercial forestry, and the scope that was following Cyclone Gabrielle around the scope of what council could control through localised regulation.
Thanks, I'll put it on my reading list.
Carbon forestry at that time, so it swept up carbon forestry. It wasn't caught prior to that change as well.
Okay. We're all finished? Thank you very much for your submission.
No worries.
And we'll be seeing you next time round.
Definitely.
And thank you for being so patient.
That's no worries.
Today is our first day and we're still learning.
Yeah. No problem.
And you've probably been through a few as well. And
So last tidy up from me, I just wondered if we might just map out some timeframes. So obviously we've spoken about Mr. Roy potentially providing a comment for the council to be able to respond to, and then for any council reply. Just wanted to map that schedule out, keeping in mind that you also have other hearings coming up.
still meeting tomorrow, where we'll be, Marcus, you need to go out that door when you go. And there could well be a list of issues that arise from the questions from the 42A report that we'll want right of reply on.
Okay, so I've made a note of everything that we've addressed, which is maybe not a new issue so much as it's had some decent discussion around it for us to be able to reply to. So we would have intended to do that as well. But certainly if there's other things that fall out of your meeting, then yeah, please do let us know. So perhaps if I just sort of plan for any response to come in the week of the 17th, is that sort of... That's not next week. Not next week.
So, because where are we, the 5th?
Yeah, and that's, I'm just trying to explore that with you. You have other hearings?
Yeah, I think we need to have a clear list of what's coming back to us, because we've got another hearing starting in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And really want to have dealt with everything before that.
I guess the question is, so we can do a right of reply, and as I understand it, that there's no reply to the reply, so...
But if Mr. Roy is filing something and the panel's making some directions, so we get that first and then we reply.
Yeah,
well,
I guess what I'm saying is that if we can do a reply, you don't need to look at it straight away, because, you know, you can go into your next hearing and...
Oh, I don't want things to back up. What I'd be hopeful of is that Marcus is going to give us something this week is it practical to expect something from you by the end of next week?
Yes, I think that's practical, but I do want to signal that there's a split really between legal issues and things that Mr. Heal's going to respond to. So for myself, I can say that it's realistic to come back to you, not next week, but the week after. But I do need to talk to Mr. Heal about the detail, and it is subject to what we get from you as well in terms of the further response.
Right.
I think the other thing to factor in is, I think evidence is due on hearing stream 2 next week, so we need to be looking at that and turning that around as a priority. So I'm just signalling that trying to fit everything in might be
Plan B,
pushing it.
accepting that Friday 2 weeks is what you're indicating. What is the list of points that you have that you're coming back on?
So the notes I've made of items that it was, some of it's just a tidy up in terms of my understanding of the discussion, but I know, so I haven't turned my mind to it. I also haven't discussed it with Mr. Heal. But firstly, the paragraph 98 question, which I jumped in on this morning around what the panel's doing in terms of decisions, and how the council then subsequently approves that. That's just a really short summary of that process, that Schedule 1, and how that steps out. Commissioner Bartlett's conversation with, I think, 2 submitters in respect of definitions and explanatory notes, and just noting that may not be engaging with it in detail because that may pass over to subsequent hearings, but it may be helpful for us to note it in our reply, not least for all parties to be aware that the issue has been engaged with.
So I'd summarise that as explanatory notes on definitions.
I think that would be accurate. Would that be your view? Thank you. Reverse sensitivity, we had a relatively dense discussion about the wording about that, so I think the council would probably come back with a suggestion on that for the panel to then obviously make a decision on, not just in the light of that recommendation, but everyone else's submissions.
And that includes then lawfully established and provided for?
Yes.
Right.
And activity 1, activity 2, which I think was the question that you had. In terms of the wording of one of the objectives and the activity classifications that flowed out of that, Mr. Hill had referred to a Wellington City approach, which Commissioner Bartlett indicated might be helpful, so I will look to see if we can provide that to you also.
All right, just
Talking too fast, sorry.
Yeah.
Can I also pipe up and say, if we are coming back tomorrow just to cover off remaining questions, do we do our mop up potentially after that exercise in case we add anything to the list?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
Well,
if we've got the list now.
Yeah, I've got my list, and then maybe if you have things beyond this list, or equally, if you give the direction, it would be in your hands for the process to make decisions.
Yeah, and you both got it right. What I was thinking was that we'll actually issue a note back to you that lists all these things plus anything else we see as appropriate.
Can I just clarify tomorrow then? Are you anticipating that the hearing will reconvene then?
Yes.
Okay.
So that we can ask you questions on your report.
Right.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. It wasn't a panel meeting, it was a hearing resumption.
Yes.
Okay.
Have you got an idea of time?
I would expect that I'll take about 45 minutes of questions of you, depending how long you give an answer for.
I mean, what time do you want to start?
Well, we start. Are you suggesting we should start as early as possible so that you can head away?
No, I know we had a meeting booked. Are you wanting to use that time as part of the hearing?
Yeah, well, the hearing was set down starting at 9:30 anyway. Yeah. Start at 9? That suit you?
Sorry, can I just check? When you say the hearing's set down to start at 9:30 in terms of being available, an available time slot, which is what I understood, I'm just wondering about fairness to other parties in the process if we deviate from the
Fair
advertised start time.
Is there a reserve day? Sorry, I may have missed that.
Yeah, so we'd actually set down, well, Matt had set down 3 days for this hearing. So submitters, if they're wanting to join us online tomorrow, and Maria's right, 9:30 is what we'd advertised.
I just have a question about Mr. Roy's further information. Will that have to be published on the website, won't
Yes.
it? Yeah.
Yep. So was there anything else on your list?
I do, sorry. Carbon forestry
Yep.
and welding pines. Well, whether or not that's together, but that was particularly in relation to the discussion with fed farmers.
So
but-
what's the issue there that you're responding to?
Well, it was quite broad. So I hadn't.
Was it the scope of the ability to put something in is what I had written down?
That's what I've also got written down.
Excellent.
That's excellent. For myself, or for council rather, I just had a note that we might consider making a submission in respect of development contributions, which in my submission are on the plan. Discussion of particular UFD 10 and 11, and that follows the dense discussion with fed farmers and Greenbrier on those particular items.
Are they legal issues or a planning issue?
Planning. Commissioner Bartlett, I had a note regarding your questions about the MPS FM and 3.5. I hadn't looked at that in detail, so once we've had a chance to look at that, I don't expect we would say much, but just wanted to include that. Then coming to the last one, which is the response to Mr. Roy, which, yes, as I would anticipate it, he would provide something very short, which maybe has some words on it so that we could then respond. So that's perhaps not one for tomorrow, but one that would come in writing for, subsequently.
But we've also got instructions to give to Ngai Tahu, and then that material come back.
Yep.
And so would you be thinking that we run a similar time track for both that and hopefully I haven't forgotten anyone else who was coming back with anything?
Yeah,
The Ngāi Tahu one goes wider than just this hearing though, doesn't it?
It was for us to provide them an opportunity to respond to what is in this chapter ahead of that hearing 3.
My suggestion would be that you prepare your direction and issue it and receive the information initially, and without having talked to Mr. Hill, I would suggest that information could then be considered in detail with Mana Whenua chapter, or if you wish to do it as a topic as within the rural hearing, and that would be for you to determine. I'm not sure it's something we necessarily need a direct reply on to conclude this hearing, but can note it as something that council will have a comment on, or might not, or might agree and have no issue with it, so would need to consider.
Just wondering whether there's a potential scope question there in terms of whether it is a consequential change or...
Well, that's what I think Mr. Leakey was going to address in his...
Yeah, and that will depend on the list of things that
Yes.
nobody's seen yet except except me at the moment. And I do apologise for not weeding out that earlier question in my list of questions. So thanks for your patience. But there are a few.
Because Mana Whenua section, the very first sentence says Mana Whenua means. Yeah. So we can issue a direction for you to work out between you where that contribution lies. So you'll decide between the two of you what is a legal issue and what can be responded to as a planning issue. Yeah, rather than two separate ones. So Cliff, are we adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow?
We are adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow.
If you don't mind, I might have to zoom in tomorrow. Sorry, I had not
That was my
appreciated the reserved day.
expectation.
I apologise.
Thanks, guys.